Hello, I'm Brigantia, Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Friday. It's time for this week's edition of Romance and Modern Mythology, Spooky Edition. And we're going to be looking at the Mummy movies, specifically in 1932, 1999, and 2001. Those tell a similar story. There are other mummy stories, of course, but they go on a related track, but a slightly different track. So I just wanted to really think of these particular three. Now, the mummy in all of these cases is, of course, called Imhotep, and the Egyptian woman that he was all about and went to all this trouble for is Anunksunamun. Now, Imhotep and Anunksunamun have got issues. And I'm not suggesting that their romance is an example for any of us to follow, merely that I think from time to time it's good to also show examples of couples that don't work and get their just comeuppance for that within the fictional narrative, because it's still very instructive, even if it's not as fulfilling or as fun as perhaps the other stories that we have about characters who are very well suited and to show how romantic attachments can work. Being able to identify what doesn't is also important. So that's why we're going into some of the couples that we find in our classic movie monsters that, well, things didn't go well. And speaking of not going well, if you are having to resort to necromancy, what you're trying to do is probably not a good idea. Now, if you are familiar with any of these movies, you know that all of the trouble is preceded by the death of Anunksunamun. That is the inciting incident that set the stage for everything else. Imhotep proceeds to try and resurrect her. It doesn't go well, he's stopped, and then a couple of thousand years he's reanimated and he tries to go through this process again, and of course it goes very, very badly. I'll probably be needing more tea breaks for this video and for the next couple of days. My allergies are acting up, and the results are not glamorous, pretty, or enjoyable, but show must go on, so we will go on. Now, in the 1932 movie, the mummy, which is also called Imhotep in Ardith Bay, is played by Boris Karloff, who is one of the great-granddaddies of all actors who played absolutely iconic characters for villains and for monsters. For me, he's right up there with, oh good lord, the first Dracula. His name went right out of my head. But there is something really arresting about watching Boris Karloff on screen. Even though sometimes the writing in the early movies wasn't exactly at a level that we would expect today, he did so much that any deficiencies you don't really notice because you just can't take your eyes off of him. And he is so inside the head of this character. He knows this mummy. He is living and breathing it. And in the moment when he's on screen, he believes it. And so it gives an additional gravity to everything else that's going on in the movie. Now, Anunksunamun and the incarnation of her that was called Helen Grosvenor in the movie was played by an actress called Zita Johann, and she has a certain something about her, some kind of star quality. Unlike some of the other actors that we see in this movie, it's really Boris Karloff and Zita Johann, and you don't want to take your eyes off of them. Everything about them is just so in sync and connected, and they are feeding each other's creative juices, and it's really a fun treat to watch. Okay. Now in this, where things really start to go wrong, is that Imhotep, he discovers who this lifetime's incarnation of Anunksunamun is, and he starts calling to her and he pulls her through with some very old Egyptian magic. But in order to be reunited with her fully, this current incarnation is going to have to physically die and go through a process in order to be immortal like he was at that particular point. And obviously she doesn't want to. You know, she's healthy, she's young, why do I have to go through all of this? And then he ultimately tries forcing her, And of course she has to be rescued from all that. And it just goes to show that, you know, however sincere his feelings were about her, there was something that was deeply unhealthy. He couldn't let go of her when she died the first time, because in ancient Egypt, I think she died of illness. But he couldn't let go of her then. And he couldn't let go of her in the modern day and say, oh, you know, she has this other life, she has this other person that she's interested in, maybe I should just leave her be. If he had honestly loved her, he either would have presented himself in the usual fashion and carried out as normal a courtship as what would be practical in the circumstances, and he would have been upfront with her. He would have, you know, at some point let her in on, you know, the secret of who he was, how he came into being in this century, who she used to be, why he wanted them to get back together and have a life. He could have chosen to do that, but he did not. He wanted to control the circumstances. He wanted to control her actions. All he was thinking about is what he wanted, and it was about his power to make something happen after, you know, centuries ago, being deprived of his sense of power because he couldn't prevent her death, he couldn't resurrect her from the word go, and he's just been prevented from fulfilling this. He wasn't thinking about her, he wasn't thinking about what she wanted, he wasn't thinking about her autonomy in the situation, and that's ultimately why when his mission fails and she comes back to herself and she's fully in her life in the present and she gets to go off with this other guy, it's why, you know, as an audience member, it doesn't bother you because, like, yeah, I mean, you know, the mummy made some pretty serious mistakes and he doesn't deserve her anymore. So it doesn't bother you when he fails. Next we have The Mummy in 1999. It was played by an actor called Arnold Vosloo, and the actress who played Anunksunamun is called Patricia Velasquez. Same story, she dies, only they had been having an affair behind the pharaoh's back. Anunksunamun had been the pharaoh's mistress in this particular version, and he got the idea that she was fooling around, and she and Imhotep ended up killing the pharaoh. The pharaoh's personal guard bursts in. She has Imhotep run away because he can resurrect her later, and then she commits suicide. So he immediately dashes out. He tries to resurrect her, but he's stopped before the ritual can be completed, and then he suffers the curse that they called the Hamdai in the movie. And then it's essentially said that if he was ever awakened, he'd bring with him the 10 plagues of Egypt, world domination, and all this other bad stuff. And of course, someone was dumb enough to start the process to get him to be reconstituted, and as the movie goes on, he's becoming more and more, at least appearing on the outside, what he was. And of course, he's still hell-bent on resurrecting Anunksunamun, has the sacrifice all picked out for it, has no compunctions about going through with this ritual. And this points to the problem that both he and Anunksunamun had, even in ancient times. They didn't care if they were going to have to kill someone in order to be together. They thought that was perfectly acceptable. That's fine. Well, you know, if that's the price you have to pay, that's the price you have to pay. And I think part of their mutual obsession was really about everyone said that we couldn't do this. So is this really about being connected with each other on a soulmate kind of level? Or is this just about everyone else told me I can't, I shouldn't, and they won't let me, so I'm going to try and do it anyway? Is this more about a childish bid for power? And that's ultimately one of the things that always fed into their eventual comeuppance. And then you fast forward to The Mummy 2001, he's resurrected again, and instead of having to resurrect Anunksunamun bodily, she's present in a current incarnation. She just doesn't have her ancient memories. He eventually restores those to her, but the whole reason she was part of the expedition to find where he was and get him resurrected again was because it was, it was a year of a scorpion, and there was this bracelet, and you could get the armies of Anubis, and they needed him to defeat the Scorpion King so he could take the armies and rule the world and all this other stuff. So she wasn't exactly coming after him because she missed him and had a sense that she was just going to be incomplete without him. No, it was nothing like that. It was simply for what he could bring to the situation. A pretty mercenary when you think about it. But he's raised, and even after um, he's informed of why he was awakened. Clearly we need you to go defeat the Scorpion King. He thought that was fun. He was on board. World domination, we can do this. And even after he restored Anunksunamun's memories to her, there was never a moment between the two of them of, oh, this is enough. Do we really need to go out and find the Scorpion King? Do we really want to take over the world? Isn't it enough that we found each other again? You have all this power. I'm alive. I'm young. I'm beautiful. Why can't we just be happy and quit while we're ahead? There was never a moment of that. It was always about the power. And this is the reason why they failed this time. It's because it wasn't about each other. And there was a scene towards the end of the movie where the Temple of the Scorpion King is coming apart, ceilings caving in, walls are caving in, all this stuff. And the mummy and the hero of the story, played by Brendan Fraser, they're hanging off this cliff, they're getting pulled off of it. Well, the actress who played Brendan Fraser's wife in the movie, she runs out against him. He was saying, no, get out of here, leave. And she was just, no, I don't think I will. Goes to him, rescues her husband because she cares about her husband not only more than life itself, but just because they have that bond. And she's willing to take risks to protect that bond. And none of those risks ever involve messing up other people's lives or having a need to take over the world. And then by contrast, you see the mummy, after his enemy gets rescued by his wife, he calls out to Anunksunamun, help, save me, this and that, and she's looking at him, shakes her head, and just shouts no, and runs out, and he falls into the pit. She gets, eaten up by a bunch of scarabs. It's all very gruesome, and it's a fitting end for them, because they were always together for the wrong reasons. They were always together, out of spite, or because it was forbidden fruit, or because they wanted power. Not exactly a good foundation for a relationship. But another issue with all three of these versions between the mummy and his princess is that no one could ever let go. No one let go when they should have let go, and it never seemed to occur to anyone that sometimes life isn't fair, you don't get your own way, and you just have to live with it. And the price of getting back together for all three of these movies, it was always too high. It always required hurting people, hurting each other, and they had, in order to pursue their goal, they had to make the same mistakes over and over and over again, the mistakes that got them into trouble to begin with. Well, now, one of the sad truths about human relationships is that everything has its time. And once that time is passed, sometimes we have a really hard time accepting that okay, I was with this person, but now it's over and now I need to move on. And unfortunately, some people will just put themselves through hell trying to get back a relationship that has run its course, come to an end, does not need to continue or be resurrected in any sense of the term. And of course, people who do this to themselves, they are miserable. And they get stuck, and these deep feelings of frustrations and feelings that go nowhere. They don't heal, and they just become as bound to their pain and their frustration as the mummy was to his funeral wrappings. And I always love the symbolism of the mummy being in his wrappings or trapped and confined in some other way, either by his funeral bandages or by the terms of his curse, or by, someone had only woke him up to do a particular job. There was such a lack of proper free will. He was trapped. He was set on a course and just stuck and just could not break the cycle. And when you look at these movies and, you take away the mystique of ancient Egypt and all of the supernatural elements of the story, what we're left with is a cautionary tale. We need to accept when things come to an end, and we shouldn't get stuck in the denial stage of the grieving process, and we should definitely stop trying to resurrect relationships whose time has come. And of course this is easier said than done. Of course it is. I mean, we're human. We are creatures of the heart to varying degrees. So I'm not trying to say that this is easy for anyone, only that there are reasons why stories like this are told. It's a mirror. It's showing us of, yes, people have felt what you felt, other people have been where you are, but they suffered. They suffered so much because they wouldn't let go, because they wouldn't face the pain of finally releasing from the situation and realizing I can't be with that person anymore. I have to get away from this situation. I have to break a cycle if anything is going to change in a good way. And that it just caused more pain and more grief the longer it kept walking in the same old rut. And that's a useful thing for us to remember, because we can find ourselves getting stuck in the same old rut, and it causes absolute havoc in life. Because the more times we make a mistake, the worse the consequences get each time, and the harder it is to repair the damage. So I think that's what I have to say about Imhotep and Anunksunamun. I hope you'll pop in next week for our next edition. We're going to be looking at Frankenstein's creature and the Bride of Frankenstein. Interesting stuff. So until next time, bye-bye.